The arts have helped me navigate loss and grief at different times in my life. I realized creativity wasn't just for performance, but actually could be transformative because it was a way to connect with others and to make sense of things. I really hope we can inspire professionals to bring more creativity into their lives.
Hi, and welcome back to Creative Minds Shaping the Future. I'm your host, Emma Palastanga. I'm an educator, author, and now podcast producer, curious to discuss a range of views on creativity and curriculum. In Series 2, we explore creative expression and why it is important for all of us. Gloria is a creative arts therapist, coach, supervisor and consultant. She helps individuals and organisations cultivate resilience and embrace change through creative methods. She has over a decade of professional experience working with clients across Europe and internationally as a registered arts therapist with the Health and Care Professions Council. She's also a member of the British Association of Drama Therapists. Her mindful arts workshops incorporate storytelling, creative writing, ink painting, mindful movement and breathing techniques to promote awareness, self-expression and well-being. In this episode, we investigate the power of the creative arts to support well-being. So Gloria, welcome. I want to start by asking you, with your background in arts therapy, how can the arts be used to support mental health?
So when we talk about the arts in relation to mental health, there are two concepts for me that are the foundation of our discussion. So on one hand, the first is relationships. At its heart is about being with, connecting, whether that's on a one-to-one or in a group. And it's about the shared space that comes alive on a symbolic level, as well as the physical, emotional changes that we experience when we connect with others. So that's the first core concept. The second key aspect is process. So here the focus is on the creative process rather than the final product. The outcome, the artwork, that's not the point. It's not the performance. It's not what we produce. But it's about the act of creating itself. And it's the journey for me rather than the outcome. And in general, in the arts therapies. And from this perspective, it doesn't really matter whether it's music, drama, movement, photography, dance, visual arts that we're using. And personally, I strongly advocate for multimodal approaches. And the experimentation across different forms. So then when we start from this understanding and we look at the variety of techniques that serve a specific function for mental health and well-being, then different methods can support mental health in different ways. So if we think about children and young people specifically, as the drama therapist, then of course role play and projective play can help building confidence and spontaneity. Then I'm particularly passionate about narrative techniques, storytelling, story enactment, and we can use them to encourage self-expression, emotional awareness. So it's all preventative, let's say. But when we think about working with trauma and bereavement, then narrative techniques can really help to create new meanings and process anticipatory grief as well as bereavement and grief. And I'm thinking as well about imaginative techniques, such as guided imagery or mindful movement activities, and even nature-based practices that can support emotional regulation and help children, especially those presenting with neurodivergent traits, to feel more present in their bodies. So this is just the beginning of how the arts can help support mental health. And in a more structured way, the arts therapies are used as a form of psychological intervention across many settings: schools, mental health services, bereavement services, addiction centers, and children's hospices. But the arts in general, as a preventative approach in mental health and well-being, should be used everywhere, really.
With a broad and balanced curriculum, that's what we provide to our children, don't we? We've got the academic subjects, the reading, writing, maths, science, all of those subjects that absolutely we need in life. But then to balance them out with sports, PE, creative subjects such as art, drama, music, gives that breadth and balance, not just of the curriculum, but for the child, for their entire well-being as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so important. And it's about introducing the arts everywhere almost,
Yeah.
and in schools.
I think when
Yeah.
you were talking about the role play, one of the things that popped up in my head was social stories. I
Yeah.
felt like, you're almost acting out that social story. You're practicing, you're preparing, particularly when you talked about anticipatory grief. When you've got somebody that is seriously ill in the family and you
Yeah.
know that they are going to die, it's a really hard one for adults to process, let alone children. So something like that role play, somebody guiding you would definitely help you to explore the possibility of the feelings that might come up or the feelings that you have right now. Because I think that's another thing for anticipatory grief. It's not just you're anticipating what might happen in the future, you're actually already losing the person as they are very often
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, and it's about the loss and the present moment, and it can be on practical aspects or really symbolic ones.
Mm.
And so, for example, a Shooting Star Children's Hospices, we provide consultancy for schools on how to support children through anticipatory grief and bereavement. And this includes creative activities for schools to support teachers
Yeah.
approach sensitive topics in a compassionate way, and to help children to express and process difficult feelings. So, as you mentioned, for example, it's about using storytelling and children's storybooks to explore change and loss in age-appropriate ways, because that's really crucial, and developmentally appropriate ways, or creating reflective journals or art projects where young people can share what well-being means to them, or loss,
Mm.
grief. And as you said, role play and drama exercises to help children and young people to understand different perspectives on grief and change. So if we think about, yeah, the school curriculum, then there are many aspects. And I was thinking about the new guidance on relationships education,
Yeah.
relationships and sex education. And I was really pleased to see that grief education has been included in this framework,
Yes.
finally.
Well done, John Adams.
Yeah, and so I was looking, yes, by the end of the primary school, children should learn about that change and loss, including bereavement, can bring up a wide range of feelings,
Mm.
that grief is a natural response, and that everyone experiences differently. And also, yeah, the guidance talks about the end of secondary school, and the curriculum expands to cover how families and relationships change over time through birth, death, and separation and new beginnings. So, yeah, it's really important then to find creative ways to explore these subjects.
Mm.
And because I'm not only working with school professionals as a therapist, but also as a supervisor and as a coach,
Mhm.
what I've learned is that a whole school approach is key.
Yes.
So for creativity to really grow in children, the adults around them, teachers, school leaders, support staff, they need to feel creative and connected to their own creativity.
The book that I've written, A Creative Primary Curriculum for All, kind of addresses that it's not just about creative opportunities for the children for thinking, for expression, but it's also about um, teachers being creative in their approaches. And
Yeah.
actually, series three will very much focus on that. I have a number of guests lined up to talk about different creative approaches to teaching and learning.
Yeah, I look forward to reading the books, the whole book. I work currently with school leaders as a supervisor, and that is with talking heads and education support and creativity, and also talking about how to support staff during bereavement
Mm.
and after a serious incident. That is really important, and so it's about how to use creativity in the sessions, but also to promote reflective practice through creativity. And also to find creative ways for professionals to look after themselves,
Yes,
especially when working in complex systems and with complex team dynamics. That is, yeah, so important.
definitely. So I think in our discussion there, we've talked about how important it is sort of after a trauma, but also how important it is just in everyday life to support mental balance and mental well-being for everybody, isn't it?
Exactly. It's also impossible to use it in a crisis intervention if we haven't cultivated it before. It's
Mm.
the practice that the daily practice can really make a difference. All these resourcing strategies, emotional regulation strategies, in fact, should be practiced. And then when we feel actually more emotional and we're struggling, then it's about using them and as they're part of our toolkit.
Yeah, I think that's really well put. We need to develop that toolkit for everybody so that when we need it, we can apply it. Um, how have the arts had an impact on your life?
Well, thinking about how I grew up, I was really lucky that I grew up in a family where creativity was really valued.
Mhm.
So my mom, who worked in the early years education,
Okay.
in fact, she passed on the deep love for the arts. And she encouraged me and my brother to trust our intuition and to express ourselves freely. And she still does that today. And my dad, on the other hand, he came from a background of applied science. So he
Uh-huh.
was always asking us to think about the practical side of our ideas, how we could make them work in real life. And even now, when I share a new project, he pushes me to ground it. So these two influences, intuition and imagination on one hand, and then analysis and application on the other hand, they shaped my way to see creativity.
Yes.
And for me, ultimately, it's about making sense of things, about creating new meanings, and especially through stories, storytelling, story making. It's about working with the stories that we grew up with, the one that we tell ourselves, that we tell others, the one that we choose to rewrite, that we actually want to change.
Yeah.
And on a personal level, the arts have helped me navigate loss and grief at different times in my life. So I've experienced that first, and creating and the creative process gave me a way to process, in fact,
Mm.
painful experiences and transform them into something meaningful. So that healing experience is really what inspired me to help others do the same. And that's why I trained to be a drama therapist. I trained actually in philosophy and psychology and coaching supervision to look at that in different ways. And I offered these services in different countries, in person in Italy at the moment, and then online in the UK. And then thinking about my own practice, I've been very eclectic in my exploration. So from music and drama when I grew up in North Italy,
Mhm.
to storytelling and movement when I was living in London, and then later when I was based in Sweden, through ink painting and mindful arts. So each of these have been has been a way of finding new perspectives. and has shaped who I am and helped me to heal and help others to do so.
Well, that's wonderful, a really hopeful tale, and it sounds like storytelling is at the heart of everything. However, it's expressed, whether it be through ink painting or drama or writing or music, actually, it's the story at the heart of it, isn't it? As to how you feel and what your fears are, what your hopes are, and expressing that, as you say, however that might be, through drama or a physical, visual, creative arts object.
Exactly, and we all find our ways, and it's interesting because these ways change as well through time. Something that worked for us in the past doesn't necessarily work for us in the present, and we shouldn't necessarily stick, in fact, to that narrative. Again, it's about those fluid narratives, and how then to be creative in our creative ways of expression.
That's a really interesting thought that it changes with your age and life experiences. And I'm thinking of a school experience. One size doesn't fit all. We need to provide, again, variety so that everybody gets what they need from a varied approach.
It's tricky as well in therapy because on one hand you want to have a standardized method, and thinking about evidence-based and research that is part of the process, but equally it's about adapting and making it unique based on the unique needs of the child that we're working with, children or young people. So it's really important in research and in general and our practice to be able to work with who we have in front of us and the things that we have in the room and or the virtual space, and have both that theoretical framework, and evidence-based approach, as well as the empathy and capacity to adapt in the moment.
And whilst we're talking about creative arts therapies, which I know is your background and your experience, and we want to talk more about that, but equally, I'm thinking teachers, I'm not suggesting for a moment here that classroom teacher becomes a therapist and uses the creative arts in that way. But what I'm suggesting is that if we know that the creative arts works so well in therapy, we know that it has benefits for mental well-being. So if we're providing that within the school curriculum, we're supporting the mental health of our young people.
We don't always need therapy, and that is really important, and children don't need therapy all the time, and there are specific situations when it's needed. But when we think about sensitive topics like loss and grief, then it is about finding creative ways to talk, and explore these subjects. And in fact, the teachers we work with and senior leaders, pastoral leaders, safeguarding leads, they are really looking for options and ways, creative ways to approach these subjects. And the feedback that we get is really positive.
Can you tell us some of the ways that they have come up with that have been used and found to be effective?
Thinking about memory making, for example, we use, and these are very common, well-known activities in the field of bereavement. But it's about using images, okay, associated with a specific memory. So it can be very symbolic images, and we start thinking about, okay, can you think about associating a memory in relation to that image? And then from the image, it's about developing a short story and even a narrative as a comic book or as a comic story. And that can be about anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily about grief. In fact, we should start from a simple day-to-day experience, to develop that language, as well as the capacity to express and describe the experience. And this is just one example, but for example, if we think about situations where maybe there are some challenges, We think about the safety box or self-care box. And so looking at all the possible creative strategies, sensory-based tools that can be included in a sensory box. So that is something that can be done on a one-to-one, but also with small groups. So teacher assistants can also provide some support with that. And then the use of storybooks and yeah, and a long list of
Brilliant. Thank
activities.
you very much. What's your most memorable moment involving the arts from your own school days or from your own work with children? And why do you think it's stuck in your mind?
Well, one of the most memorable moments from my teenage years is linked to a drama class when we did a movement exercise, which actually is quite well known in the field. So we danced to energetic music and then froze the moment the music stopped. And in that stillness, without any prompts, we had to sense the right moment to clap together, then to jump together, and then to walk and stop again. And there were about 20 of us in silence. And I remember we were moving as one. And that clap, that jump, those steps, they felt really, really magical. And it was simple and almost transcendent at the same time. And it was in a connection that felt deeply shared, even transpersonal. It was one of the first times I truly understood the power of the performing arts and how this power taps into a shared, embodied, intersubjective space, and that lit a spark. And I realized creativity wasn't just for performance, but actually could be transformative because it was a way to connect with others and to make sense of things. And then, of course, from my experience as a therapist, there are many memories and thinking about my clinical work, I wrote an article last year about the multidimensional grief of siblings, and I describe working with a group of bereaved siblings. And we used story enactment, drawing from fairy tale imagery and the hero's journey as a framework, the archetypal framework. So through symbolic enactment, so becoming the hero, facing the challenges and returning transformed. That was the process and how the children were able to express themselves. So yeah, ultimately it's about the arts giving a path to transform grief and connect deeply and then reauthor our stories and children's stories.
That sounds wonderful. What was the impact on those siblings who'd been bereaved going through that process?
Yeah. It's interesting because of course the session itself is divided in different parts, and this is really crucial because you need to prepare for this type of work, which it's really deep, and then to process and to talk about the embodiment and the enactment. So during the reflective circle, the reflective dialogue, this is when during the sessions when we used story enactment, then children were able to make connections between the experience of the protagonist in the story and their own experience. And they were able to talk and share memories, also painful memories, for example, of the days before their brother or sister died, that they were not able to describe or share, or they didn't feel able to do, of course, before. But through the story and the enactment of the story, then that single image was able to encapsulate and connect with the ambiguity and the paradoxical nature of what they went through, because it wasn't black or white. The image itself talk. So in the article, I described some moments, and I think it's about allowing children to make connections without then giving interpretations. Uh, yeah,
That's wonderful. I said it's opened pathways to communication for deep emotional topics.
yeah, exactly.
It's given them the vocabulary, the structure in which to put their own experiences, hasn't it?
That's a great way to summarize a very complex process, but which at the same time is very simple, and it's about human connection
Yeah.
and yeah, and creativity.
It's interesting. Pretty much every guest I have on here in whichever series has talked so much about connection. And I think I hadn't realized how deeply rooted connection is with creativity, connecting ideas, but connecting to others. And like you said, that human aspect of life in general, it creativity provides that opportunity for connection.
Yeah, and connecting maybe with parts of ourselves that we have forgotten.
Yeah.
Or and equally that we wanted, that we needed maybe to forget because that was a mechanism, a protective mechanism. But then when we think about the storyline in trauma, for example, there are those gaps when trauma has happened and those are unprocessed memories. Then it's about reintegrating and processing so the narrative is fluid.
Mm.
So even in those circumstances, the parts that we have forgotten for some good reason at the time, but we needed to survive those events, they can be reintegrated in a safety way.
Absolutely. What can you tell the listeners about challenges with unprocessed memories? So I guess I'm asking if we don't process those memories, if we lock them away because they're too painful to discuss, what complications arise further down the route?
Yeah. But this is a question that has different layers and levels because, on one hand, we don't want to process things at the wrong time
Mhm.
and the wrong moment. And for example, when we talk with school professionals or parents in general about sharing bad news, it's about offering the time, identifying a time when the child can then talk about the event if they wanted to. But equally, when we think about processing difficult memories and traumatic memories and not doing so, it's almost like adding pressure and pressure, internal pressure, and that is for the child, but also for adults, that they need to continue to perform as normal. And then it means that maybe when something is going to trigger them and remind them of what happened, those unprocessed memories they can take over, and maybe we are not able to function as normal, and the child then is labeled as misbehaving or not being able to follow rules and not being able to cooperate, but all the behaviors that we then witness and see are actually a different way to express the emotions and feelings that haven't been processed and memories as well.
Thank you. It's made me wonder, as well as through formal therapy, as we've discussed, in terms of teaching those subjects or providing opportunities for those subjects in school, whether without speaking a single word, those children can work through their traumas without us even knowing that they're doing so. So, in terms of art, if they produce a piece of art, like you said, it's not about the final product, but in going through the process, it might just be supporting their emotional well-being.
I think it's about validating their experience. When I've been working with parents that were very worried about certain subjects to be and topics to be explored in the class because they said this is going to trigger my child, and in fact, then it was really important to have a conversation with the teacher, because in fact, if teachers are not aware, then it's really hard for them to work with the family and to work with the child. But if they are aware, they can then rephrase and use appropriate language. So then there are options and choices are offered. Maybe the child doesn't want to share with the whole class the drawing or the story, and that's okay too. But then if it is shared, even on a one-to-one setting with the teacher, then it's just about validating. Well, it's not about just, it's a lot, in fact. It's about it's validating the experience and giving them the opportunity to say aloud things that maybe they were not able to say before or didn't want to.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely, it's the validation is absolutely crucial with any feeling, isn't it? What is next for you, Gloria Garbujo?
So looking ahead, well, my plan is to continue supporting families and professionals through the different services I offer. So drama therapy, supervision, coaching, consultancy, training. I'll be continuing my work with Shooting Star Children's Hospices, supporting schools and families through bereavement, and as well as my supervisory work with education support and talking heads. So that's for sure. Then at the same time, I want to keep expanding and deepening my private practice as a coach and supervisor and trainer. And I'm especially passionate about supporting professionals in healthcare, educational settings, one-to-one group coaching, training for organizations. But then thinking about another aspect, which is writing and research, they're also an important part of my life and what's next for me. So I'm currently working on a book chapter for Routledge, and edited by Dr. Barbara Thompson and Dr. Robert Niemeyer. They are two leading figures in bereavement studies. And the chapter explores a new method I've been developing, and it integrates the Sesame approach to drama therapy, which is the method the approach that I studied, and the multidimensional grief theory, which has been developed by a clinical research team in the US, including Dr. Julie Kaplov and Dr. Christopher Lane. So it's an exciting opportunity to share knowledge with other professionals and contribute to how creative methods are understood in the field of loss and grief. And then thinking about Italy, I will also be teaching and continue to teach at the University of Padua in Northeast, and helping professionals finding creative ways to support people who have experienced loss and grief.
Wow, it sounds like you're keeping yourself very busy. Who else passionate about the arts would you like to hear on Creative Minds Shaping the Future, and why?
Well, I would love to hear from other arts therapists who are working in educational settings. And there is so much important work being done at the intersection of creativity, mental health, and learning, but it's not always visible to the wider public. So bringing different voices and from different disciplines, drama therapy, but also art therapy, music therapy, dance and movement therapy, play therapy, we can show just how many ways creativity can support well-being. And that's not only during therapy, but also can be done in a preventative way. These conversations could really help increase awareness of the unique role of the arts and the arts play in helping young people and children to build resilience, process emotions, and connect more deeply with themselves and with others.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You've given me an idea now for Series 5, Gloria. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. We've talked about opening pathways to communication for deep emotional topics. We've talked about the dangers of these unprocessed memories and how they can burst through at not the best moments. And the power of the performing arts was something you mentioned earlier, which has really stuck with me. So I hope, like you say, I hope we've inspired others to explore creative opportunities for our children. Thank you so much. It pulls our conversation to a close, actually.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure to share these ideas and to talk with you. And I really hope we can inspire professionals to bring more creativity into their lives and into their work.
I hope you've been inspired by Gloria to include more creativity in your life to benefit well-being. Next episode, I speak to Natasha Nechat-Murphy, who is a dedicated and experienced primary educator with a passion for art. Here she is with a few words on the subject.
There's so much connectivity within art, and even like the big artists of today as well. You look at their work and you can feel their passion, you can feel the emotion, and that is so powerful. And it allows you to communicate freely beyond any barriers that you may have. If you've given them that creative thinking early on, you're building that foundation for life.
If you're following this podcast from the start, I hope you've enjoyed listening to Series 1. If you're a new listener, welcome and thank you for joining us. In Series 1, we asked, does creativity have a place in education? In Series 2, we explore creative expression and why it is important for us all. In this series, I speak to painters, sculptors, musicians and dancers, to name a few creative disciplines. I already have more fantastic guests lined up for Series 3 and 4, where I'll be talking with inspiring individuals with a range of experience. If this sounds like you, maybe you have a view on creative thinking or creative expression, please get in touch by following me at ACPC4A, the number 4, on X, or Emma Palestanga on LinkedIn to connect. There are many ways you can support the show for free, and it's much appreciated. Share with your contacts, rate the show, or leave a review. If you like, you can buy me a virtual coffee to help with the costs of the podcast platform. Please follow this podcast so that you can stay up to date on the release of each episode. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next episode of Creative Minds Shaping the Future.